May it please the court, counselors. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. When you came down in June, we were all in that big room together. And I know you remember because we talked about it and we spoke with you individually. And back then in June, and with each of you starting back on August 6th, moving earlier this month, you were all at a disadvantage. It was almost a little bit unfair to you, the seats that you found yourself in, because you didn't know what we knew. You didn't know who Kendra Hatcher was. Your name when an indictment was read to you. The judge explained to you the law, read the indictment, you heard the name Kendra Hatcher. You didn't know at that time that Kendra Hatcher was a shining beacon of light who illuminated the lives of countless people. A woman who lived to make a difference in the lives of others, in particular children. You didn't know that Kendra Hatcher's family, a wonderful group of people, you didn't know that their lives were devastated and destroyed. You know why? Because you didn't know him. You didn't know Kristopher Love. You didn't know what we knew, that he was a cold-blooded, evil assassin. Because on September 2nd, 2015, in the parking lot of the Gables apartment complex, what this assassin did was he snuffed out the light. Dr. Hatcher, Dr. Kendra Hatcher, became State's Exhibit 1. A memory to her family. This is what he did. Don't you forget for 1 second what happened on September 2nd. See, this was the culmination of a planned out, perfectly executed assassination. Robbery was the ruse. What the defendant did was he volunteered to kill a perfect stranger. For what? No beef against her. No reason to kill her. You know what he did? Think about this for just a second, ladies and gentlemen. Kendra Hatcher was doing what she had done her entire life, just living, being who she is. And she comes home that evening to a parking garage. The last thing she ever saw in her life was that. She saw the face of evil with a gun pointed at her. And I want you to consider this. Why do you think she screamed? Why do you think Ash and the 911 caller heard screams like an animal, primal screams? Because that's the last thing she saw. She put a bullet in the back of her head. And what do you know from the evidence? You know from the evidence that there was gunpowder on the back of her hands. You know that that bullet went through her skull, severed her spine, came out her chin, and hit her in the chest. What does that tell you? That tells you her hands were up, head was down. Where was the cartridge case found in the car? The floorboard of Kendra's vehicle. A vehicle that was about 4 or 5 feet tall. Now you use your common sense and figure out what that man did to Kendra. The last moments of her life, she sees him. You heard from the medical examiner how she would have lived for a few minutes, unable to breathe after that bullet severed her spinal cord. Ladies and gentlemen, today is the day that you bring justice for Kendra, you bring justice for her family, the people who loved her, the people whose lives she touched, and for our community. Because you see, you know all you need to know about Kristopher Love. An assassination. But you know more about it, don't you? You know that this is a career criminal who spent his entire life, even beginning as a juvenile, doing what he wants to do. Burglaries, robberies, aggravated assaults, car theft, gun charges. You know, when it comes to what he did, in a way, it's not surprising. The man who's lived a violent life, negatively impacting others' lives, takes what he wants, motivated by his own greed, motivated by his own need to benefit himself. That's who he is. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk to you about what we spoke about individually. Me and Mr. Fitzmartin, Mr. Pfeiffer, Ms. Long, we took the time to talk to each one of you guys individually about these special issues, and I want to kind of go through those with you because it's familiar to you, isn't it? You've heard that before. Each side spent 45 minutes talking to you about those special issues. You start with special issue number 1. Now, one of the things that we told you was that in answering special issue number 1, that question of future dangerousness, whether the defendant would probably be a future danger to society. We said, you know, you can start with the facts of the offense alone. You can look at what he did by itself. But let me ask you this. If back then I had told you, any of us had told you, that this was the motivation, this was the reason for the crime, and this is what he did, this is who he killed, that alone by itself would have proven to you, and does prove to you beyond all reasonable doubt, that there is no point in time ever when people will be safe from him. Anybody who is capable of committing such a horrific and shocking crime has proven to you that he's a future danger. Now, I also want to point out to you, you heard from Warden Harris. He told you a little bit about, we brought him in to tell you about prison life. Now, so think about this for just a second. What was this crime about? This was a defendant who signed up for his own benefit to kill a perfect stranger that he had no beef against. He did somebody else's bidding, put a bullet through Kendra Hatcher's head for someone else. You heard from Warden Harris who's in prison, how the system works there. There's this barter system in prison. Do you think that the first opportunity that Kristopher Love gets to do somebody else's bidding inside that prison, you think he's going to back down from that opportunity? Do you think he would miss any chance he could get to benefit himself? One of those other inmates comes up and says, I don't like the way that guy down there looked at me. I'll give you some of my cones here if you go take care of him for me. Do you think he'll hesitate for a second? And you know that circumstance is going to come up in prison. As Warden Harris said, that's how it works. It's all about the barter system inside those prison walls. Now, I want to address this 30-year study thing that you kind of heard about. You know, the 30-year-old study. You know, when somebody hits 30 years old, all of a sudden they're less likely to spontaneously, come out. As Mr. Brooks said, this was a planned and premeditated offense. But I want you to also recall yesterday about how the defendant spontaneously had an outburst in court. We talked about that study. Clearly, it doesn't apply to him. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the other thing I want you to consider when you're looking at special issue number 1, future dangerousness question. If the facts alone of this offense don't prove it to you, if the whole way the system works in the prison with the bartering and his opportunity to benefit himself to do others' bidding, if that doesn't, in conjunction with the facts of the offense, convince you, well, look at his criminal history as well. Look at the types of crimes he's committed. It's all about benefiting himself. It's all about how can he do things that hurt others that benefit himself. And what does that prove to you? That he has no regard for anybody else. None of it. All of his crimes prove that. This crime is just a culmination of all that. A shocking culmination of his lifestyle that he's led as a career criminal. Ladies and gentlemen, there's no doubt on special issue number one. The evidence we brought to you proves that to you. So I want to get to special issue number two, because we talked about that in Lord Dyer as well, and we said the key word in special issue number two. The key word is whether there is a sufficient mitigating circumstance. And what does special issue number two say? It says, look at all the evidence. Consider it all. Consider everything you have. And determine whether there's a sufficient mitigating circumstance. So let me ask you this question. In light of the horrific nature of this crime, in light of where he's going to be with this opportunity to affect others' lives negatively, in light of him being a career criminal, in light of what he's done to a family and the impact he's had on so many people's lives, how could there ever be a mitigating circumstance that rises to the level of being sufficient? How could there ever be a sufficient mitigating circumstance in light of all the evidence? Because special issue number two tells you to consider it all. And looking at everything, is there enough? In light of that, how is that possible? Now, I want you to think about really what the mitigating evidence is that they presented. And I use the word mitigating very generously to describe the evidence that the defense produced to you, because what they produced to you was basically the defendant's family. I want you to think about this for a second. Everything that has happened to Kendra's family, to Kendra's friends, to his family, is because of him. He's caused all of it. You know, in a way, those aren't mitigating factors, those are aggravating factors. He's done all that, created everything, created all the pain, the hurt. And special issue number two asks you to consider whether it's sufficient to warrant a life sentence. It makes it worse, doesn't it? That he's done this to so many people. And that you know he will continue to do this to more people. Now, I also want you to look with special issue number two. You know, I want you to consider this, that this isn't a man that came from a violent home, filled with abuse. The worst thing he experienced in his home was that his parents split up and got back together. Well, let me tell you, my parents split up when I was pretty early, and I'm sure statistically some of yours did too. You know, if somehow that is sufficient to mitigate such a horrific lifestyle and a crime like this, I don't know how it possibly could be. So when I say they presented mitigating evidence, how really is any of that mitigated? As his own dad said, you know, the household was just like any normal household. People argue, people don't get along. There weren't fights, there wasn't any physical violence. You know, ladies and gentlemen, I want to go back to our individual conversations. And you now know why we asked you this question. We said, if we present to you the evidence that proves to you that he's guilty, and that proves to you beyond reasonable doubt that special issue number 1 should be answered yes. And if you don't find that, in light of everything you've heard, there's a sufficient mitigating circumstance, you told us that if we did that, you would answer those questions yes or no. And we took you at your word, which is why you're sitting where you are right now. We believed you when you told us that. And now you know why we asked that question. Because this is where you find yourself. And I want to say this, that this is probably something that is weighing on you right now as you've heard this evidence and you realize you're about to go back to the jury room and answer these questions. And you realize, based on the evidence, that these questions should be answered yes and no. That that's where the evidence has guided you. That's the right thing, that's justice. You realize that, and I know that's weighing on you right now. It is a big decision. It is not an easy decision. It should not be an easy decision. You're here because we asked you to take this job seriously. We expect that you take this job seriously, and that means this is not an easy decision. When that thought crosses your mind, I want you to think about this for a moment. I want you to think about him. And I want you to think about what he did. I want you to think that he volunteered. He wanted to kill another human being. He wanted to do it for a few $100 and some drugs. He wanted to do this to a perfect stranger. No problems with her, never met her. Didn't even know her. He was willing to plan out, to stalk, and volunteer. You remember the evidence you heard that there was talk about, using a needle or using a bat. He stepped in and said, you know what? Tell you what, I'll just shoot her. It's easier. So, when that thought starts coming into your mind about how difficult your decision is, I want you to look at the evidence and remember, not only was this an easy decision for him, he wanted to do it. I wanted to just kind of finish with this. Tell you guys what this case is really about. And about a case that involved premeditation and planning. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing. This wasn't a robbery gone bad. Robbery was a ruse. This was a murder motivated by greed and profit. A man who wanted to benefit himself at the cost of another human being's life. The intentional, senseless killing of an innocent person, Tender Hatcher. What did she do to deserve this? I think you heard Tammy Pantano tell you she lived her life the way you're supposed to. Never put yourself in a position for something like this to happen. I want you to think about the brutality and severity of this murder. Now, folks, you see what I have up on the screen? Do those words look familiar? They should, because they're your words. We asked every single one of you in the questionnaire and in person, we said, when considering whether the death penalty is appropriate, what things do you want to consider? What's important to you? Those are your words. You told us what's important to you. You told us this case is the case where the death penalty is appropriate. Now, this was a shocking, horrifying crime committed by a cold-blooded, evil assassin. And today, we're asking you to bring justice for Kendra, bring justice for this family, bring justice to this community, and answer those questions yes and no.